We had Ken Chenault and Ken Frazier on this program. 72 very senior black executives coming out historically for the very first time, effectively calling out a law and calling out their peers. Why would they feel this way otherwise?
Yeah, I read their letter and I saw their interview. Again, it was ill-informed. It didn't cite specific provisions of the law that were somehow designed to suppress voting. I mean, one commonly cited feature is that you now have to use information from your driver's license or personal identification card on your absentee balloting. That's an improvement over signature verification, which can be arbitrary and difficult for election volunteers to do. I also note that you have to show an ID every time you get on an airplane at Delta. You have to show an ID to get a ticket at Major League Baseball's will call offices. Again, this is just an example of them buying into left-wing smears against Georgia without a basis in fact.
But in terms of the smear, let me ask you this, because I think it's probably the biggest issue, and Ed Bastian called it a lie, which is to say, what is the evidence that there was a problem that triggered what is now 330 ballot restriction initiatives in 43 states? I mean, that's the ultimate question, and I don't believe there was a court case that ruled in favor or even suggestive that there was ultimately a problem.
Well, Andrew, what Governor Kemp in Georgia has explained is their elections had a lot of problems last year in terms of inefficiencies and delays and so forth. And it wasn't just on November 3rd. Look at their primaries in the summer as well. They had lines in which voters were waiting for hours. Governor Kemp has said that's not acceptable to him, and it shouldn't be to normal voters. What this law is designed to do is to make sure that their elections are streamlined and efficient, that voters have convenient, accessible voting options, and that those options are safe and secure.
Right.
I mean, for Ed Bastian and James Quincy at Coca-Cola to get up on their moral high horse when, for instance, Coca-Cola is lobbying behind the scenes in Congress against a slave labor bill for China's religious minorities, or Delta partners with a Chinese Communist Party-owned airline, really is the height of moral hypocrisy.
Senator Cotton, you talked about there being long lines in Georgia, and yet one of the most criticized parts of the Georgia bill is one that makes it a misdemeanor in order to, if you serve water to people standing in line. What do you find the justification for that is?
Literally every state in the union, Steve, has laws that prevent people from approaching voters in line. The idea is to prevent campaigns and parties from trying to campaign right next to a polling place to even coerce and intimidate. New York State, for instance, prohibits the provision of food or drink to voters who are in line. Now, the law does say explicitly that campaign workers, that poll officials, can provide water to people who are in line. But this is a very common practice all across the country. Moreover, the entire point of the law, as I explained, was to streamline these elections in Georgia, make them more efficient, so you don't have the kind of long lines that you saw last year, not just on November 3rd, but in the summer. That's exactly what it's going to do. Seizing on the practice that is common across states all around the country about approaching voters who are in line is just another example of how the left is smearing Georgia, and these ill-informed CEOs are just buying it hook, line, and sinker because they don't want to be protested, they don't want to be boycotted, they don't want their little social justice warriors with their newly minted Ivy League MBAs rising up in their corporate headquarters.
Yeah, I think you just touched on this a little bit, Senator Cotton, but whether it's the voting laws discussion that we're having now, looking at Georgia and some of the other states, whether it's the protests we saw last summer, in general, we have seen basically this paradigm shift in the way that corporate America is now going from neutral to being very outspoken about social and socioeconomic issues, for better or for worse. Why do you think CEOs of these companies that are taking a stand believe this is good business?
I think they're afraid of left-wing attacks, and they're afraid of being attacked on cable news and in the newspapers that they read. They're worried about, again, the very activist, young social justice warriors they have working in their corporate headquarters. But I can tell you, these CEOs do not speak for their entire workforce. I've literally encountered hundreds of gate agents and baggage handlers and pilots and flight attendants for Delta, for instance, during my time in public life, who have thanked me for the work I'm doing in the Congress and said they support Donald Trump. So I'd encourage all of those conservative and Republican employees who work in Delta's workforce or Coca-Cola's workforce to be more active themselves. You should send emails to your CEO, the way the media reports suggest all of these left-wing employees were doing so, and encourage them to stick to running an airline, or selling sugary beverages to Americans.
You have been a recipient of money over the years from many of the same companies that are now speaking out publicly against these laws. How do you square that? I'm thinking of Bank of America. I'm thinking of Walmart. I'm thinking of Paul Weiss, a law firm which has now made a big effort to actually fight these laws across the country.
Oh, it's very simple, Andrew. I don't endorse my donors' agenda. They endorse my agenda. And they know that when they contribute to me, whether it's $5 or $5,000, that I'm going to do what's right for Arkansas and what's right for America. And what's right for America is to have safe, convenient, accessible elections. That's exactly what this Georgia law has done. What's not right is to have these moral corporate hypocrites weighing in on public policies when they don't have any specific knowledge about them, they don't have any particular expertise, and they haven't taken the time to inform themselves about the facts.
Senator, while we have you here, wanted to get you get your thoughts on a couple other big headlines this morning, including one that Steve Leisman just broke within the last hour around Janet Yellen proposing a global, if you will, AMT for corporations. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, we'll see what she says later today, but I would just note to some of these corporate CEOs who run to Capitol Hill and lobby Republicans privately to protect them from Joe Biden's tax policies and his regulatory policies that if you want Joe Biden's election laws, you might wind up with Joe Biden's tax laws as well.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.